everybody.
It's a shame.
I'd like to welcome you to the Soup and Salad dinner. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin Barnett. I'm the new chair of the Democratic Party here in Ashland County. I want to thank you all for showing up. And we do have a couple speakers tonight. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, the 33rd President of the United States, President Harry S Truman.
I hope all of you can hear me. If you can't, just raise your hand. It's really good to be here because when I left office 3 years ago in 1953, my percentage rating was 22%, the lowest of any president up to that time of the United States of America. Hopefully down the road my percentage will increase a little bit, but mainly due to two things. Number one, I fired the demagogue, the guy who thought that he was God, General MacArthur, who decided always to override me in any decisions. And when I fired him, I plummeted real quickly in the ratings. And the second reason is I dropped 2 bombs on Japan. And at that point, some people were in favor of it, but most of the people were not. So those are probably the 2 reasons why I left office 2 years ago, this being 1955, with the lowest rating of any president of the United States. I take that as a compliment, and it really doesn't bother me, because I know politicians. When I was a little boy, I studied piano, started playing the piano when I was about 4 years old. I wanted to be a concert pianist, and I loved to read. I've read encyclopedias. I read about every president of the United States. I was an avid reader. But I told my mother, I want to be a concert pianist when I become an adult. And if I can't be a concert pianist, then I would like to be a honky-tonk piano player in a whorehouse. And after 3 or 4 months in the Senate, I realized that dream came true. So I remember my first term in the Senate, Rayburn came up to me and said, Harry, and by the way, call me Harry. I do not like to be called president or senator. Harry, you're only going to have one friend in Washington, D.C. That's going to be your dog. But if your dog was raised in a Republican household, you're in big trouble. So I always remember that. But where do I begin? My dream was not to be president of the United States. They call me the accidental president, the man who did not want to be president. Even now, after I retired, I still would not want to be president of the United States. But duty called, fate intervened, and there you have it. I can remember Tom Pendergast, who was in charge of the Democratic Party in Kansas City, came to me and said, Harry, you're a good man. I know you had to declare bankruptcy on your store, but I know you paid it back, every penny. I know you're a family man. You believe in the family, husband and wife and children. You're very faithful to your wife. I know you're a good man. I want you to run for judge. Now, in Kansas, a judge would be like a county commissioner. So don't get those two mixed up. So I ran for the judge and I was elected. And I was a good county commissioner. And we did a lot of changes in that county. And Pendergast was so amazed at what I could do, only having a high school education. He said, why don't you run for the Senate? I'm going, the Senate of the United States? I'm a pig farmer. I grew up on a farm. You know, I don't use $30 words. I never had a higher education than high school. And you want me to run for the United States Senate? Sure. And I really believe you're going to be elected. Well, I ran. I was elected. That was a scary situation. For the first 3 or 4 weeks, I walked around the halls of the Senate thinking to myself, what in the world am I doing here? And then after 6 months walking around in the halls of the Senate, I asked myself, what is anybody doing here? And I realized the importance that was placed upon me as the senator from Kansas. You know, there are a lot of things that we take for granted in life. And one of those things I realized was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I realized that as a senator, we could do a lot of things to help in the war effort. And they placed me on the Truman Committee, and I saved the United States $40 million, because you know how the government does. They like to buy those $25 toilet seats, you know, $10 hammers and screwdrivers, and we took care of all of that. And Roosevelt caught wind of what I was doing on the Truman Committee. And Roosevelt started to dig into my life, and he said, is this guy a veteran? Well, you better believe I'm a veteran. I joined up in 1917 in World War I. Now, I cannot see, if I take off my glasses, I cannot see you. And I realized that they would never have me in the Army because I'm partially blind. So what I did is I snuck in to the nurses' quarter there at the base the night before, and I confiscated the eye chart. And I took the eye chart back and I memorized it, and then I brought it back before the nurse came in, and that next day I stood up there and I had 100% eyesight, and I was drafted. I made it all the way to colonel. Can you believe that? This pig farmer from Kansas, a colonel in the United States Army. I was head of Company D, the 34th Division in France. Now, there's one general that I saved his butt, and he still hasn't thanked me. General George Patton owes me. He still owes me, but of course he is gone now. But if it wasn't for our Company D artillery, Patton's infantry would have been devastated, but we protected Patton there in France at the Battle of the Argonne. Yes, he owes me a lot, and I'll probably never hear that for Patton. Anyways, I left the military with one of the highest ranks in my company, and I thought to myself, how in the world did this pig farmer from Kansas end up such a high esteem in the United States Army? And now I'm a U.S. Senator. After that, I saved the United States government close to $40 million in wasteful spending that the military is noted for. As they approached 1944, the Democratic Convention, Roosevelt was not happy with the vice president at that time. And Roosevelt told his cronies, get out there and find somebody who we can have as vice president that's a good man, that the people will love, but I want him to be a people person. And so they came to me. 4 days before the Democratic Convention, they approached me and said, President Roosevelt wants you on the ticket. And I said, no, I don't want to be vice president. They took me in this room, they sat me down, and the phone rang, and it was President Roosevelt. And he said, Harry, what is this I hear? You do not want to be on my ticket. And I said, heck no. He slammed the phone down. It's not always you get to make the President of the United States mad. The next day, he called again. What is it going to take, Harry, to put you on the Democratic ticket in 1944? It's a winning ticket. You will be the Vice President of the United States. Now it was my turn, and I slammed the phone down. No way! I wanted to be Vice President of the United States. 2 days before the Democratic Convention of 1944, Roosevelt shows up at the door there in the hotel. They wheel him in. I'm cornered. In fact, literally, I'm in the corner. All the Democrats that have any power at all are right there, and they're all looking at me. And Roosevelt said, I want you, and no excuses. You are going to be my vice president. I had no choice. And I said, okay, I will be your vice president. I had 24 hours to prepare my acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention in 1944. How was that going to go over? What does a pig farmer from Kansas say to millions of Democrats? This is your man for vice president. It all worked out. I was only vice president of the United States for 82 days. During those 82 days, I only met Roosevelt twice. I had no idea what was going on in the world. I had no idea about the Manhattan Project, the development of the atom bomb. None. I had no idea what was going on in Europe in World War II with Nazi Germany. I was not privy to any of that. And then it happened. As vice president, I presided over the Senate, as you know. I dismissed. We went back to Rayburn's office. We were toasting ourselves with a little bit of Southern comfort. The phone rings. They handed me the phone. Harry, you are wanted in the White House immediately. You know how you feel when the principal calls you in to his office at school? That's how I felt. I'm in trouble. The President of the United States does not call Harry Truman into the office immediately. They said, wait for the Secret Service. What Secret Service? I never had any Secret Service protection. I didn't care about the Secret Service. I took off, grabbed my hat. I always have my hat on. Went down underneath the Capitol building, got into my vehicle, and I drove as fast as I could. I looked in the rear view mirror, and there was about 4 or 5 Secret Service cars following me as fast as they could. I make it to the White House. I run up the steps. There's Eleanor Roosevelt standing there with her hands crossed. I said, Mrs. Roosevelt, what's wrong? And she put her hand on my shoulder, I'll never forget. And she said, Harry, the president is dead. I'm going, uh-oh. And I said, Mrs. Roosevelt, is there anything that my wife and I can do for you? And she looked at me, and now she put both hands on my shoulder. And she said, no, Harry, you're the one in trouble now. And I'll never, ever forget that. I was sworn in at 7:30. Nobody could find a Bible in the White House. I have to have a Bible to be sworn in. Where? It's the White House, the people's house of the United States, and there's not a Bible anywhere. And so for a half hour, they went to every room in the White House. They finally found one in the janitor's room. And they brought it up. And I was sworn in as the 33rd President of the United States. From the farmhouse to the White House. This old pig farmer now is the most powerful person on earth. The next morning, precisely at 0800 hours, here comes the Joint Chiefs of Staff, George Marshall, Stemmis, and his group of men. They were all carried in these large boxes, and they laid them down, and I'm thinking, what is this, a rummage sale? What's going on here? Mr. President, stop. I don't want to be called Mr. President. From now on, you will call me Harry. Harry, this is the Manhattan Project. What is the Manhattan Project? The atom bomb. And you're in charge now. For the next 4 hours, they explained to me the process of splitting the atom, the process of what would take place with this bomb, the most powerful weapon in mankind, and you're in charge of it. At that point, we had 3 atom bombs made. 2 of them was going to be dropped in Germany, 1 of them on Berlin. The other one they're saving for Japan. Fortunately, Germany surrendered, so we did not have to drop the bomb on Germany. We still have 3 atom bombs. On August the 5th, they came to me and said, Harry, you have to make a decision. I said, we'll drop the bomb, but 2 days before the bomb is dropped, I want leaflets and pamphlets dropped all over the area. I want everybody to know what is going to happen in 2 days. Give them 2 days to get out. And nobody left. I was really hoping and praying that the Emperor of Japan would realize what is about to take place. No word from the Japanese. One of my generals came to me and said, Harry, how in the world can we drop this bomb in Japan? Why don't we take Japan inch by inch? And I stopped and I said, listen, have you ever heard of a small island called Okinawa? Okinawa is the closest island to Japan. It's only 8 miles long. Now listen to me. 120,000 Japanese on Okinawa held off the Allied soldiers for 6 months. The Japs lost, get this, 15,000 men killed. Many of them committed suicide because they would not give up the island of Okinawa. We lost 12,500 Marines and our soldiers at Okinawa. We lost 126 planes. We lost 37 in our ships just trying to take this 8-mile-long island. What do you think the Japanese are going to do on the island of Japan? They will fight for every inch. Some of my generals came in and said, Harry, if we invade Japan, we will lose 400,000 men. It will take 2 years to conquer Japan, and we'll have to kill women and children because the Japanese are so fanatical. They're arming their women and their children, and they will fight every inch. Now you make a decision. Old demagogue General MacArthur, he thinks he's a god, you know. I always compare General MacArthur to, who was that guy in the Civil War with the blonde hair, that thought that he was greater than the President of the United States. And MacArthur telegraphed me and said, President, don't call me President, call me Harry. Harry, we're ready to invade Japan. I told him to shut up. I'm the commander-in-chief, not you. I will make the decision. Finally, I went to my wife. I'm a Baptist, you know. I don't know whether you knew that or not. Good Democrats are Baptist. And I went to my minister and I said, will you pray for me? I have to make this decision. And the minister said, you have to do what you feel will save American lives. If you're looking at the casualties, not so much even for the American soldiers that will die on taking Japan, but for the women and children, the Japanese women and children that will die. Finally, I made the decision. I picked the red phone up and I said, it's a go. Of course, all of you know what happened on August the 6th, 1945. Precisely at 0830 hours, the Enola Gay dropped what we called Fat Boy, which weighed about 25 tons. The explosive power was 20,000 TNT, and it was absolutely devastating. Anybody within a radius of a half mile to 3/4 of a mile were vaporized. But that was just within a second. Thousands of people died of cancer related. I'm thinking, oh God, will they surrender now? Do they get the message? 2 days went by, we did not hear a thing from the Emperor of Japan. I'm going, another one? We dropped leaflets. We pleaded with the Japanese through various communications from Russia and China that would communicate. Not one word. No surrender. So finally, I gave the go-ahead to drop the second bomb. And the second bomb was more devastating than the first one, because between Nagasaki and Hiroshima, one was surrounded by mountains, and that kept the sound waves and so forth within that certain area. In total, with the two bombs, approximately 225,000 people died. And I always thought to myself, okay, all right, but how many people would have died if we would have invaded Japan? I have a little sign on my desk. You know what it is? What is it?
Buck stops here.
Buck stops right here. I don't blame previous administrations on anything. Anybody that does that is not a good president. You don't blame somebody else. You take the responsibility. You can say what you want about old Harry here, but when I make a decision, I stick by that decision. And I made the decision to drop the bombs. So don't go blaming anybody. I would say to the press, you come right to me. Or come to my desk, and there's a little plaque there that says the buck stops right here. And if the kitchen is too hot, then get the heck out of the kitchen. That's what I always say to some of these other politicians that criticize me. And most of the criticism came from some of my real good Republican partners. You know, when I was over the Senate, the Republicans and the Democrats got along. We worked together for the benefit of the American people. Think of that. That's rare, isn't it? And they loved Harry, and I loved them, and we would go out to eat, and we would talk about what is good for the American people. And you know, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was walking to this meeting, and I was no longer president, and I saw one of the soldiers standing there, and I knew right away because of the badge that he had on him that he was one of the guards of the unknowns at Arlington National Cemetery. You ever been there to see the guards? Uh-huh. And he snapped and he saluted me. He said, "Where you going, Harry?" I said, "Oh, I got to go to this meeting." And he looked at me and says, "Give him hell, Harry. Give him hell." That was the best compliment any American could give to me. Old Harry. Now, on the other side of the coin, about a month ago, I was in New York City. You don't want to go to New York. And we got lost. My driver got lost. And so we're driving down the street, and I told my driver, "Listen, let's stop, let me get out and go to this house, knock on the door, and ask for directions." And so I get out, I go up, I'm knocking on the door opens up, this guy's looking at me, and he looked and he goes, "You look like that old son of a bitch, Harry Truman." And I looked back at him and I said, "I am that old son of a bitch, Harry Truman." Wham! The door slammed right in my face. So that gives the other side of the coin. And that's the way I like it. No compromise on my part on any issue. I'd like to leave you with 5 things that my administration and that I feel that we did for America. Number 1, With my executive order 9981, I desegregated the armed forces. I saw how the colored people, when they came back from World War II, were treated. They couldn't buy property. There were certain areas they were not allowed to be in. They were treated terrible. And I said, this has got to stop. And I'll stop it. And so I issued the executive order. From now on, there's no discrimination within the military, and that's every branch of the military. Every branch. That's the first thing I'm proud of. And the next president, you know who he was. Yeah, I always thought that Eisenhower was smart when he had his uniform on, but the moment he took his uniform off, he is dumber than a pile of rocks. He's about as dumb as Calvin Coolidge. You know, Calvin Coolidge was a sleepwalker in the White House for 4 years till we got rid of him. The worst president was Warren Gamaliel Harding. God, please save us from the Republican Warren Gamaliel Harding. He was atrocious. But anyways, so we issued that executive order. Fortunately, President Eisenhower has followed through with the Civil Rights Act, but it wasn't until later on. And there's a young man I'm looking at right now by the name of John F. Kennedy. He's just a young whippersnapper, but you know, I like him. I like him. He's a World War II hero, you know. And I think maybe Kennedy also will follow through with civil rights, hopefully down the road. That's the first. Second, the Berlin airlift. You know what that was? The Berlin airlift. Russia thought they had us right between the legs. They weren't going to let us into their sector in Berlin. And I'm going, you're dealing with an old pig farmer here, folks. You know. And what I did is we had an airlift and we flew in the supplies and the medical supplies, and Russia could not do one thing about it. Number 3, you know that I'm a Baptist. Okay? And you know I read the Bible. Don't panic. And I know how God protects Israel. You following me? And I know exactly what the Bible says. Those that protect Israel, God will protect. Those that try to destroy Israel, God will destroy. Point Adolf Hitler. In 1948, I made the decision against everybody around me says, don't do it, Harry. You don't say that to Harry. I recognized Israel as a free nation. 1948, Israel has their country. And 2 others. George Washington said a long time ago, it is inconceivable that any nation can be governed without the Bible and God. George Washington is my favorite president next to Abraham Lincoln. Washington was a Whig, I'll forgive him. Abraham Lincoln was the first major Republican, I'll forgive him. But these were 2 great men that understood, our country. And we need to protect that. And one final thought before I put all of you to sleep. Okay? I want all of you to remember me like that soldier did who guards the unknowns at the Arlington National Cemetery. I wanted to be the president of all people, black and white, rich and poor. And I always wanted to cross the aisle over to our Republican friends so that we could all work together for the benefit of America. And I think that is so important. Well, God bless all of you. God bless the United States of America. And I hope to see you in 1956. Thank you.
Give them out.
Hey, let's hear it for Harry.